Welcome to our webinar on July 15 coup attempt organized by the Communication Directorate of Turkish Presidency. Today, the topic of the webinar is Turkey-US relations in the fourth year of the failed coup attempt. In Turkey and around the world, many people are both commemorating the fourth anniversary of the failed coup attempt. We are commemorating those who lost their lives in this heinous coup attempt. At the same time, it is a celebration for Turkey to celebrate the democracy, celebrate the people's will, and there will be many events organized by Communication Directorate in the next 2 days. So we are starting the US programs actually with this panel. We will have some excellent panelists today. We will have Serdar Kılıç, Ambassador of the Republic of Turkey to the United States, Burhanettin Duran, General Coordinator of SETA Foundation, Usame Cemal, Secretary General of US Council of Muslim Organizations, Paula von Schirach, President of Global Policy Institute, and Mark Hall, Producer and Director of the documentary Killing at Charter School, Corruption and Gulen Movement. We will today start with the Ambassador Kılıç, and Ambassador Kılıç will provide us a general framework of the state of Turkey-US relations after 4 years after the failed coup attempt. Mr. Ambassador.
Thank you very much, Kılıç Bey. I would like to thank the Communications Directorate for organizing this timely event to enlighten the viewers on what happened on the 15th of July. I should also like to welcome all those that have participated in this event. They will, I am sure, make enormous contributions as far as our understanding of the 15th of July is concerned. As you have mentioned, it has been 4 years since the Turkish democracy came under a direct terrorist attack. The worst attack, for that matter, I should say, during the recent history of the Turkish democracy. But people tend to forget. So if you allow me, I would like to first set a perspective and put things into the right context in order to better understand what happened on the 15th of July and to better understand the motives of the terrorist organization that was behind the coup attempt orchestrated on the 15th of July. First of all, as most of the people that are interested in Turkish history, domestic history, will recall that I'm sorry. We had a history of failed and successful coup attempts. 1960, 70, 1980, in 2000s, there had been other initiatives in order to disrupt the proper functioning of Turkish democracy and to put pressure on the democratically elected leaders in Turkey. So 15th of July was not the first attempt in that regard. But 15th of July in itself differs to a great extent to the previous attempts on the Turkish democracy, coup attempts on the Turkish democracy. First of all, the 15th of July, very much different from the previous coup attempts in Turkey, was conducted by the civilians or controlled by the civilians. It's out of the chain of command. Civilians were killed. Turkish army assets were used by rogue army officers against the Turkish people. And maybe the most important difference is that the Turkish people took to the streets to defend their democratically elected leaders and the Turkish democracy. That had been the first time. In 1960, 70, and 80, the Turkish people were idle and they just watched the developments and what happened to their democratically elected leaders and the Turkish democracy. It was not the case on the 15th of July. Upon the call of the Turkish president, they took to the streets and with the flags in their hands, and with their bare hands, I should say, they stood in front of the tanks, the rogue army officers, F-16s, helicopters, the rifles, and whatever. And we have lost 250 innocent lives, very precious lives, but that coup attempt on the Turkish democracy was thwarted. Also, the 15th of July was not the first attempt of this clandestine organization whose leader is residing in the United States since sometime, since 1999. They also conducted attempts on the Turkish democracy before in order to overthrow the Turkish government and in order to control the Turkish state structures and institutions. First, they tried a social unrest, a social coup, if you like, in 2013, from June until demonstrations organized demonstrations were conducted in 25 December 2013. This time, they made use of the legal structures, or they infiltrated elements in the legal structures and the security forces to conduct a legal coup against the Turkish government. Again, it failed. And then 15th of July came, and they made use of their rogue army officers that have infiltrated into the Turkish army since mid-1970s to conduct a military coup, I should say, because it was out of the chain of command and the way they staged the coup attempt against the Turkish government. The only labeling and then the correct definition could be a terrorist coup attempt. It was thwarted again, thanks to the efforts of the Turkish people and the determined stance by the Turkish people against the coup plotters. So this is the perspective that we should try to understand what happened on the 15th of July. As I have to emphasize again, much different than the previous coup attempts, which were organized within a couple of months or maximum a year or so, 60, 70, and 80. This was planned for almost 40 years. If you check the video messages of the leader of the coup attempt, he's instructing his followers to infiltrate into the state system, get control of the nerves and the key positions, and wait until the moment that they are going to be able to control and give the final punch to the Turkish democracy and to the Turkish system. That was the clear-cut instruction which was recorded actually, and you can view on the internet. Also, if you would like to understand what Fethullah Gülen terrorist organization stands for, in addition to what he has done in Turkey, you should also take a look at what he is doing abroad, outside Turkey. He is running almost 3,000 institutions, schools, NGOs, and so on and so forth in more than 100 countries. If we come back to the United States, they are running over 170 schools in the United States, and they are collecting U.S. taxpayers' money. I mean, Mr. Mark Hall is over here, so I wouldn't like to put words in his mouth. He's an expert in that regard, and I'm sure he's going to enlighten you better in that regard, better than the ambassador in Washington, D.C. But I should like to emphasize that he is running over 170 schools and collecting around 850 million US dollars. He's employing Turkish teachers in those schools, thousands of them, and some of them cannot speak even English. And he brings them to the United States in total violation of H-1B visa system in the United States. So there is misuse of US taxpayers' money. He's collecting funds from the US taxpayers through the state. This is actually in a nutshell what this terrorist organization is and how they conducted the 15th of July coup attempt in Ankara, in Turkey. Sorry. Kılıç Bey, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Duran, I think you will, the floor is yours. Your perspective about what happened in July 15 coup attempt and its aftermath.
Thank you very much, Kılıç. Well, as you know, as a Turkish citizen, I have witnessed this historical moment in the bridge of Bosphorus. So I'd like to start by giving some statements on that. 4 years have passed since that coup attempt. And now it's very alive memory for us, because when I saw tanks rolling on the Bosphorus bridge, I was very upset, thinking that did not deserve Turkish people and Turkish state and Turkish democracy. And at the same time, thankfully, at that night, actually in the morning, I watched heroes disarming those tanks at that morning. So we are grateful to those who lost their lives and survived the coup attempt with injuries. And Turkish people since then have the feeling that we have to keep this memory as long as this memory alive, as long as this country exists. So because this is the first time that in the Turkish history, Turkish people have prevented such a coup attempt being realized. If you compare it to 1960, 1971, 1980, and 1997 coups, this was historically granted, and it was a great day for all Turkish citizens. At that night, I have witnessed people were coming from many different sectors of the Turkish society. It was not just peculiar to conservative or religious people. On the contrary, all of the people from different sectors of Turkish society participated in this heroic night. And at the same time, in the following nights, during the organizations of Democracy Watch, I have seen the same thing, the same reality for all the Turkish people. What happened to people's conscience that reacted people at that night was actually related to what Turkey experienced since 2013 until 2016. Turkey was experiencing a regional turbulence simply because of simply stemming from the Syrian civil war, and the issue of terrorism was very on the top of the agenda. And of course, this created some domestic turbulence and some polarization within Turkey. But at the same time, people reacted to this FETÖ Gulen Movement led coup attempt by taking taking themselves to the streets and refusing such a coup attempt. It was a sign of people's advocation to democracy, people's advocation to keep their state and country safe. And that was actually a historical moment that created a political environment, a new political environment for the Turkish people. And people have realized that if they don't keep they save their countries, their democracies, their state, this will be, Turkey will be kind of new Syria or new Iraq. This feeling was strengthened by another feeling that if now we don't support President Erdogan today, we will feel the same feeling that our fathers felt in 1960 when Menderes was overthrown by a coup d'etat, and it was hanged by the coup d'etat planners. So they, in that way, they created a kind of struggle that led to keeping democracy, state, and Turkish fatherland as safe as possible. Well, this is the first point that I want to make as a person who participated in the struggle against this coup attempt. Of course, Turkey since then is having some difficulties and some tensions in terms of relations with the US and with EU and some other regional powers. So in order to clarify what Turkey is trying to do, I want to say some points on that regard. This July 15 coup attempt, as I said, created a new political environment for Turkey domestically and internationally. And first, Turkish people realized that we have to keep our interest, national interest, strong as possible. And we have to keep our unity strong to promote our national interests. And since then, Turkey is trying to project its power in Syria. And to my personal opinion, it is something very late. And Turkey conducted several operations regarding struggling with terrorism, PKK terrorism in Syria. As you know, there were 3 operations. And the similar operations in Iraq. And at the same time, we can enlist some new activism of Turkish foreign policy regarding the East Mediterranean and Libya. And all these initiatives are directed to promote Turkey's national interest, not by diplomacy, at the same time, by showing somehow military activism to keep national interests. But at the same time, starting from Libya, this is something very related to supporting UN-led, UN legitimated Sarraj government. So this is very parallel to international norms at the same time. As the time passes with this COVID-19 pandemic, Turkey is aware of the fact that, we are going into a chaotic world. So you have to try to keep your interest by diplomacy at the same time. So this medical supplies given by Turkey to the needed countries was actually a sign of diplomatic efforts for making cooperation and making some elements of cooperation as norms into the new world. But at the same time, all of the countries are aware of the, in this Trumpian era, the US is somehow, in a way, leaving the role of superpower. I mean, leading the liberal world order. Of course, US is the most powerful country in the world, but at the same time, there is a, Washington is trying to leave some responsibilities to the regional powers, and this brings some chaos into Middle East and North Africa as well. And at the same time, the EU is considering how to deal with the new world. And at the same time, Russia, India, China are on the same page to rethink about the coming world. So Turkey is not an exception to this. And Turkey is trying to keep safe itself in this turbulent region. But at the same time, the world, Turkey was experiencing this turbulence since 2013. The same thing is happening in the world now. And it seems that if Trump's re-election, then this chaotic world will continue to dominate the world. If the Democratic candidate elected as president, and again, the same thing for US leadership, global leadership, will be problematic at the same time because of the internal problem, domestic problems of the US. So what is Turkey is trying to adapt to this changing position, to these changing parameters of world politics. But at the same time, Turkey has a chance of strong leadership within the country. So all of the parameters for Turkey is two-sided. One, try to keep your interests, and at the same time, try to make some diplomatic efforts for cooperation for the world, of course. And the medical supplies, medical diplomacy, let's say, was something positive in that direction. I think that's enough, Kılıç, for now.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Duran. And our next panelist is Mr. Jamal, Usama Jamal. Yeah, floor is
Thank
yours.
you, Mr. Coach. Thank you for the invitation. I'm grateful for the presidency to have us on this occasion to speak on behalf of American Muslims. My greetings to all the colleagues on this call, and especially Ambassador Sardar Kilish, who is a very close friend, not just to me, but for the entire American Muslim community. First of all, I would like to salute the Turkish people for making the greatest history of our modern time, for standing up and failing a coup. I do remember the few minutes and hours of the failed coup back then in 2015, which were the most hardest time that I ever been going through, because it wasn't too long ago when we suffered the fail of democracy in the Middle East after the Arab Spring. So we were distressed then. And then we heard the news of an attempt, a coup in Turkey. So we were completely devastated by the news. And so we were glued to the TV and to the news media. And I would like to address this event from different perspectives. First of all, as you know, American Muslims, in America, of course, we cherish democracy, the will of the people. We admire America because of that, and because people can participate in the electoral process. You can choose your candidate that you can vote for, whether wins or fails, it doesn't really matter as long as you have the freedom to exercise that. And there is no interference of a military that dictates on you what to do, what not to do. This is what we love about democracy. So when we saw the attempt of the coup in Turkey, it was very, very difficult for us to foresee how Turkey would turn out if the coup succeeded. Also, we come from a background from the Middle East, where unfortunately there is no glimpses of democracy or freedom of the people. So we don't want to have that setback again. U.S.-Turkish relationship really is very important for us, and therefore whatever happens in Turkey is of concern and is important for us as Americans and as American Muslims. American Muslims in particular are in the middle of whatever happens in the Middle East or in the Muslim wars affect us, because we are a community that is very diverse, that its constituents come from different parts of the world. And whatever our government here in the US has in terms of foreign policy affects the Middle East, and therefore we are affected by it. So whether we like it or not, whether we are involved or not, we are in the middle of the policies on both sides of the ocean. So therefore, what happens there is very important for us to know and to be involved in as well. So what shocked me on the day of the coup, not just the coup itself, because I thought that Turkey has been set sail for democratic process and democratic life, and that the military would not attempt to do something like that. But understanding afterwards the tentacles of the Gulen movements and how much they have infiltrated the Turkish system as if a parallel government running underneath. Now I can understand the magnitude of this project in Turkey and what they're trying to do in Turkey and in the region as well. And therefore, what shocked me also the most, our media, the American media, addressing the coup in Turkey. On July 17th, the analysis of CBS, for BBC News, I'm just quoting one of them, that they're talking about why the coup failed, as if regrettably the coup failed because there was not much of public backing and there is not much of wide military support. That really was very distressing for me. instead of highlighting how bad the coup was and to praise the Turkish people for standing up for democracy and for holding on to at least what we call American values and Western values of democracy, they were kind of regretting how it failed because there was not much public support, as if they are willing and they want to encourage public support for a coup, military coup, as well as that the military did not have a wider support from within its ranks. That really was, for me, a point to stand back and say, was I completely deceived by our media in America, and whether there was really much support for the Middle East and the Muslim world, and particularly in Turkey, that the democracy should be encouraged and should be maintained and should be protected. I felt that our democracy in that region is not protected and would be cheered the minute it collapses, and a military coup would come and do whatever agenda is welcomed. And that is an alarming thing for us. And then I have seen the fingerprints of the Gulen movements over this coup, and the way they have handled the coup, the way they have cheered the coup at the beginning, and then they tried to distance themselves afterwards, made me reinforce my finding that this group, unfortunately, they are not a movement, but truly a project in the area, because no one at this time and age should ever support military rule. I think I also would like to greet and salute the Turkish army, who maintained their neutral position even after a certain military officers wanted to do this coup. The rest of them maintained their neutral position. And I think this is something that need to be recognized. And I think this is how they made a great Turkish nation. And now they have much more respect because they have held themselves to the high standards and experience and expertise, and in terms of being a military that will protect its nation, will protect its people, not really to kill its people, as we have seen in different parts in the Middle East in particular, and that's my interest, is in the Middle East, what's happening. So I don't want to miss that opportunity to salute the Turkish army and say, this is exactly the role that you should adhere, because that's how you get your support. This is how you get your respect and your dignity and the pride of the nation, when you focus on protecting and let the politician run the affairs of the people as the people choose their representatives. It wasn't too long ago, at the time of the coup, when democracy was completely killed in Egypt with the military coup over there. You can imagine, if the coup succeeded in Turkey, how that region is going to have turned out to be. Not a very good one at all. Turkey is very important in the region, not just in Europe, but also in the Middle East. There's a history between Turkey and the Middle East. Turkey is not an alien country. Turkey has been in the life of the people in the Middle East for 500 years. We cannot just simply ignore that and think that Turkey is an alien country to that. What happened to Turkey is very important to us, and what happens in the Middle East is also important to Turkey. And I think recent incidents in the Middle East shows how important the role of Turkey. You can imagine what could have happened if Tripoli of Libya has failed under the attack of General Haftar, and how much devastation would have been done to that region, and the hope of democracy would completely been fizzled out and diminished. And so Turkey support for a legitimate government in Libya has made a big change. whereas the rest of the Western countries who preached us all the time about democracy and the hope in democracy, they kept watching the bombardment of Tripoli and the killing of innocent people in civilian neighborhoods, in hospitals and at airports, really raised a lot of alarm for us that where's the world watching the bombardment and doing nothing? And the minute Turkey came in and helped to protect the civilians in Tripoli and help the government to maintain its security around southern and eastern borders of Tripoli, the entire world now rushing to have a peace talk. Well, that is good. Thanks to Turkey for forcing everyone to come to peace talk and to settle this issue outside military. But we understand this pause, this request, it was not a genuine one. It was to stop the advancement and the control of the legitimate government and to have much more deal with the military under Khalifa Haftar. Whatever that is, we are grateful for this win of the legitimate government in Libya, saving the people, and that credit that we will never forget that Turkey has made its major contribution. It came from the main door with dignity, under the eyes and the watch of the entire world, with a clear mandate and an agreement between the Libyan legitimate government and Turkey. And I think that is the difference that we can see and we can judge, and our generations will always remember, versus those who came from the back door supporting a group of people who wanted to devastate the Libyan people. They support and they continue to support them with their weapons that continue to kill innocent people. And I was so also kind of surprised at how much they keep claiming that Turkey as a foreign interference in Turkey, and they forget the Russians there. Not only a threat to their Libyan people, but also to NATO. And we should be grateful for Turkey to put their boots on the ground there and take the risk, instead of asking Turkey or treating Turkey as an equal partner to Haftar and to the other groups. I think that was another thing that we are very much disappointed to see them treating this issue like that. I don't want to take much time. I'm sure that there will be a second round where we could shed more lights. But again, I'm grateful for this invitation to be here. I salute the Turkish people again, and I hope that democracy will be protected in Turkey to continue to be a role model for the rest in the region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jamal. And Mr. von Schirach.
Many thanks. Good morning or good afternoon to those of you who are in Turkey. Mr. Ambassador, nice to see you, as always. And other friendly faces, Mr. Mark Hall, we had a pleasure of meeting you and hosting you at the Global Policy Institute, where you presented to us and educated us, quite frankly, about the influence of the Fethullah Gulen organization in the US, and I'm sure you will have plenty more to say about this. You know, I know the ambassador has spent quite a bit of his career as a NATO hand, you know, in very senior positions at NATO headquarters and beyond. And, you know, myself, you know, as an analyst and having worked with the Atlantic Council here in Washington and following NATO affairs for many years, you know, I would be remiss if I wouldn't say the obvious. We are allies. The United States and Turkey are allies. We've been together in this alliance for decades. Of course, things have changed. The general atmosphere and context has changed. But I think it's important to refer to that because it's history, it's past, and it's, I would like to think, the glue that still binds us together in a different way now because, again, the international geopolitical context has changed. What has changed? The Cold War ended. The Soviet Union is no more. And so the sense of urgency that might have existed back in the 70s, 80s, you know, and even beyond until the implosion of the Soviet Union about sticking together, about being, you know, all as one, as NATO allies, well, that's been kind of diluted. and not just in the case of US-Turkey relations. Look at Germany and how much they spent on defense, and look at many other countries that have kind of softened their approach regarding the how can I say, the urgency and the importance of sticking together and acting as one. So that's certainly one thing that I think needs to be considered as context. Regarding the American reaction to the failed coup, I think it has to be seen in context of some concern, which I suspect overplayed, and the ambassador explained this already, about Turkey going its own way, right, and not sticking to us, and developing its own agenda and creating its own forays in uncharted territories, with relations with its neighbors or Russia or what have you. I fully agree with the other speakers that yes, there was almost like, oh my God, it didn't work. Gee, we wish it had, something like that. The failed coup was like, for some at least, not officially, not on the government side, but it's certainly regarding analysts and media coverage as like a missed opportunity, which is really awful if you consider that this was, the attempted military overthrow of an elected government. Since when are we in the business of blessing coup d'etat? But I am afraid for many in Ankara and beyond, this exactly the way it sounded. And I'm really sorry to say that. I don't quite understand that particular emphasis, but it is indeed true. And it was only, I think, after the visit by then, as it were, Vice President Biden, now Democratic, virtual Democratic candidate to Ankara in August, I believe it was, that is almost a month after the attempted coup, in which he kind of apologized. And he said, well, I'm sorry, I should have been here sooner. We didn't really do enough to support who? You, the legitimate government. And so that trying to kind of, at least at the official level, from the White House down, the then Obama administration, tried to rebalance the perception of where does America stand regarding this attempted coup. That said, things have not been, it's not like that from that moment onward, things are fine. There's still this lingering suspicion in Turkey, which I fully understand, that on whose side is America really? And I think that this issue, of this unresolved issue of the official request by the government of Turkey to have the extradition of Fethullah Gulen, charged as, certainly inspiration or mastermind or whatever term you want to use for the failed coup of 2016, and the fact that this hasn't quite happened, again, would lead to some dismay, again, to say, on whose side are the Americans? Are they on the side of the legitimate constitutional government or on the side of those who plotted against it? I think while there may be some exaggeration in this, suspicions, they're not entirely unfounded given the facts. So that, I think, it's problematic. And I really think that on this, if I may just, try to say general observations, Americans, notwithstanding the efforts made by many, Mr. Hall here, being one of them, and the embassy certainly here in Washington having done a great deal of effort to educate us Americans about the dangers of the FETÖ movement, I think that unfortunately most people don't quite understand what it is. Maybe because they're lazy, maybe they don't want to listen, maybe they pretend that it's not happening, including the growing or significant influence that the movement has managed to secure here domestically in the United States as well as in other countries. All this is, I hope, is still work in progress. I hope that the malfeasance and the illegality of the FETÖ movement will be brought to light. I would like to see some, charges brought against people. Again, Mr. Hall probably will enlighten us on this. And I think that is highly problematic. Of course, it doesn't help that the situation in the Middle East has, deteriorated, on other fronts that are, technically at least unrelated to the attempted coup. the Syria problem, the Kurdish issue in northeastern Syria, American support for the, those who are, for all intents and purposes, sympathizers or affiliates of the PKK, and sort of a stubborn unwillingness to recognize how that would be perceived as unfriendly. An American support that was perceived as a minimum unfriendly in Ankara, if not worse. All these things, then of course you've got the S-400 issue of the, the purchase of the air defense systems. I mean, all this together, unfortunately, contributes to create an atmosphere of suspicion, and that's really bad. There have been some attempts, on the part of the two presidents, Erdogan and Trump, to kind of soften all this. There have been efforts, at least goals, to increase bilateral, trade exchanges significantly. That's good. More business. It's good, rather more better than less. But now we are all in the middle of this COVID, pandemic, and therefore it's hard to, to do business in a normal way, even if you really want to. So where am I on this? I think that I still believe, maybe I am, an optimist beyond reason, but I still believe that if America looks at the Middle East and looks at the chessboard there and who is who and who is doing what, it's hard to think about countries that are natural allies of the United States in the future. And Turkey, despite all these problems, despite the differences, despite the suspicions, despite the failure of the American leadership to recognize the threat to the Turkish constitutional government that was represented by the failed coup, I think that dialogue is possible. In fact, it is ongoing, but things can get better. In other words, this is not a doomed situation. You say, okay, forget about it. Relations have really declined and deteriorated to a point that there is no conversation possible. I think there is conversation. The ambassador, I'm sure, knows a lot about all this, and I'm sure that's what he does every day. And I am reasonably confident that things can improve. I would think it would be very good if here in the United States we took hold of this Fethullah Gulen issue and evaluated it properly. And I think that would be very helpful. Again, I am not an expert on this, but I've heard enough to be convinced that this movement is a threat, and it should be dealt with. I'm not sure what the appropriate means should be, but I think that would be a gesture of understanding and showing to our Turkish allies, we understand your predicament. We know what you've been through. We know what this underground threat has represented and still represents, and we want to help within our laws and our boundaries and our due process. But something has to be done. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. von Schirach. And our final panelist is Mr. Mark Hall. Mr. Hall, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kilic, and thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for having me on this panel today. I really appreciate it. And I just want to say my sincere apologies for what happened in Turkey 4 years ago. It was a very dramatic, violent event. I remember it very clearly. I was sitting in an edit office with an editor working on some footage. We had many televisions on at that time in this edit suite. And we started to get information that there was a coup attempt coming from Turkey. And my editor had worked on Killing Ed with me for over 5 years, is very well aware of the Gulen movement, and turned to me and said, do you think this is a result of the Gulen movement's activities, both here in the United States and in Turkey? And so I looked at him and said, I do think that this had something to do with the Gulen movement. But surprisingly enough, all of the commentators that we listened to that night on CNN, on Fox News, on the BBC, they all were coming from a very, what I felt was an antiquated viewpoint of what was going on. They had looked at this as though it was another military coup that had taken place in Turkey, as the ambassador had said, in other decades. There was only one person that had mentioned that that this might have been something led by FETÖ, the Fethullah Gulen movement. And as we found out as weeks went on, that it seemed that this very much was a coup attempt connected to the Gulen movement, FETÖ as it's known in Turkey. And that led us to open up the film and add an epilogue of about 5 minutes to educate Americans and others in the West about this connection between the Gulen movement, which had very successfully here in the United States promoted itself as a moderate group, as a very well-educated group, as a group that people in government here in the United States and in academia and in the media could trust. We felt that was very important to show the terrible damage that this coup had on Turkey. It was, explained to me that many people felt that this was almost like Turkey's 9/11 at the time. And I can see how that was, because it was such a different thing to people. And so, as the ambassador said, the Gulen movement is something that affects not only Turkey, but it affects us here in the United States. And by that, I mean, the Gulen movement, FETÖ, has spent much time infiltrating our country, the United States, into various political offices, whether it's local, state, or federal congressional offices. It has spent a lot of time courting those in academia with a very false message, I believe, about who they are. And it's also generated a lot of sympathetic media coverage. And I think after the coup, there was a scurry of those reporters here in the United States trying to catch up on what the Gulen movement was, who they are, and how they affected Turkey. But I don't think they ever really went into the depth of how the Gulen movement is affecting the United States, and how now, 4 years after this coup attempt, we're seeing some of the same types of things here in places like Texas, where the Gulen movement is especially powerful and has much money and influence. That, some of these issues I'm quite concerned about, that I'm sure Turkish people were concerned about 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, about the growth of the Gulen movement in their country. We're seeing that here now. As the ambassador mentioned, the Fethullah Gulen movement in the United States now operates approximately 180 charter schools. Many people in Turkish don't understand, perhaps, that these schools are funded by taxpayer dollars here. And that money, for example, here in Texas, where there are roughly 64 Gulen-affiliated charter schools, is generating well over $300 million a year. Totally, in the 26 states that they're operating in the United States, these schools, they're generating well over $800 million in tax funds. This doesn't include other things like grants from various family foundations of billionaires, federal grants from the Department of Education. It's becoming close to $1 billion group here in the United States. And as anyone that lives here in the USA understands, money buys power. And this group has bought power over the last 20 years. And we're seeing some of the negatives of what that power holds. Essentially, our congressmen, our state elected officials, our local mayors who have received money in campaign funds, who have in the past received other highly valued items such as free trips to Turkey, trips to Greece, etc. We're seeing that they become impenetrable, especially in cities like Houston, which is where I grew up. I was nearly arrested in Houston last year when I attended a very sad group of well-intended Americans who hosted the former editor of Zaman, which was a Gulen operated newspaper, as anyone in Turkey would know. It's now been closed. But here in Houston, the World Affairs Council hosted this man who was talking about the problems of journalists in Turkey currently. Well, I went to confront him and hold up an article that he had written back in 2013 when he was the editor. Now, the article had his face on it. I don't understand Turkish, but it had been translated for me. And it was saying that, you know, that was fine. You know, freedom of speech, you know, was limited according to those that were arrested at that time. So when it was Gulen journalists who were being detained for their activities in Turkey related to the coup attempt in 2016, that was not okay for this particular gentleman. And it nearly got me arrested for asking that question, because that question wasn't wanted to be presented to this controversial figure from the Gulen Movement. Instead, a question asking about his sincerity was something where I had the police take me out of the building. That's the level of infiltration that they've made into cities like Houston, Texas, where they're operating many schools, they're operating many non-profits. They have the ear of the local mayor, and Houston is the 4th largest city in the United States. Sadly, I don't think that much has changed from an American perspective in the last 4 years. I know how hard the Turkish government, through its ambassador here in the United States, its consular officials, and others, have tried to raise these questions about who we're actually allowing to operate public schools in the United States and generating so much income, of which most of it's very opaque. And it was my belief during the coup and afterwards, of course, that this coup was led by the Gulen Movement. It was fomented and organized. And some of that money, I fear, had been used against the Turkish people from the taxes that I pay here in Texas. And it's sadly, we have not seen much happen from the side of the U.S. federal government in terms of extraditing Fethullah Gulen from his compound in the Poconos in Pennsylvania. But I have a feeling that as time goes on, more and more American citizens, the average American, sees questions about the Gulen Movement and pushes back. And ultimately, I think there has to be this day of reckoning for this growing, powerful group, its use of finances. There's been a few successes here in the United States in the past year to push the Gulen Movement away from school operation. The Gulen Movement tried to open 2 schools this past year in the state of Alabama. That was unsuccessful. It was a big defeat to Gulenists such as Soner Terem, who really started many of the schools in Texas. He is no longer welcome there, and I think the media covered the matter quite well and quite fairly. And I can also say that in the state of Nevada in Las Vegas, they're finally having some pushback from the state government there in the opening of additional charter schools and additional revenue generation places. Here in Texas, I'm sitting in Austin, Texas today, where I live. It's not over here. The Gulen Movement continues to grow. Next week, or actually week of the 27th, excuse me, July 27th, Soner Terem, who started the Harmony charter schools in Texas back in roughly 2000, he's asking for a 3rd charter, a 3rd contract with the state of Texas to operate an unlimited number of new schools. Now, these schools, a lot of times now, are having an American face. Not all of them are as populated by H-1B visa holders from Turkey, but still they are under the control of the Gulen Movement. Make don't guess that they're not. They are very well connected. So it will be left to seen in the weeks and months ahead whether or not the state of Texas and the State Board of Education here rejects the Gulen Movement's latest attempt to open more schools, to get more tax money, to gain more power. And I think as American citizens, we have to be very careful about a group like this that has shown that it is violent, that has shown it is political, that has shown that it is very opaque and secretive. And I would say to my, American friends that might be watching is watch for this group in your city, watch for them in your state. They have a goal, and I think their goal is political here in the United States as well as related to money. And we need to be very well aware of these people because our media is not doing its job in reporting on it fairly. Our politicians are not looking at this dilemma completely and with any sort of backbone. And as American citizens, I do believe that we are and very concerning, but we also need to look at that issue here because it could also in some way find itself to our nation as well. So I'll wrap up my comments there. Again, I want to commemorate and remember those that died in Turkey on July 15th, 2016, as well as the many hundreds and thousands of people that were injured. And I have to say that it was a remarkable event to watch that night. And I'm very grateful that the people of Turkey stood up to this group, FETÖ, that fomented this coup and pushed back on it for the benefit of everyone there in Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hall. And in our second round, I will have some questions for our panelists. And we will again start with Mr. Ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, I have two questions. The first one is about the US reaction to the coup attempt in the night of July 15th. And I was following the coup attempt from social media, of course. I was out of Turkey. And there was a huge disappointment, public disappointment about the first reaction of the US to this coup. It wasn't a statement, but a response that Secretary Kerry gave to a journalist while he was having that press conference with Mr. Lavrov. And my question is, can you tell us about what happened that day in Washington, D.C.? I know some of them would be, of course, confidential, but your at least interactions with the State Department, if there are any after those statements, and what was your reaction about that? And my second question is, Mr. von Schirach stated that he's optimistic about the future of Turkish-American relations. Should we be optimistic about it? Why and why not?
How long do we have?
Let's say for two questions, 10 minutes.
Well, I will try to do my best in that regard. Well, it's very difficult to take the microphone back once you give it to an ambassador. They will take it to the limit. Sky's the limit in that regard. But with regard to the 15th of July, I was in this office. I was sitting in this very table during that night. I received a telephone call from Turkey from two ministers, and they told me that there was an attempt of developing coup in Turkey. So they wanted me to see what's happening in Turkey and what will be the reactions of the US authorities in that regard. I checked with my contacts in the Turkish army because I spent almost 20 years working with the Turkish army in my NATO capacities. I found out that actually there was a group of rogue army officers trying to stage a terrorist coup attempt against Turkish democracy. So I immediately gave a call to the White House. I was on constant contact with the White House during that night, 5 or 6 consecutive telephone conversations. And I emphasized one point. I told them that during my entire tenure in Washington, D.C., you kept on criticizing the Turkish democracy. That Turkish democracy is in the erosion and the Turkish democracy is losing its basic assets and so on and so forth. And now I told them the Turkish democracy is under a terrorist attack. And the Turkish people took to the streets, and at the cost of their lives, they are trying to defend the Turkish democracy and their democratically elected officials. So I asked them to stand by the Turkish people, by the Turkish democracy that they have been criticizing. And I asked them to come up with a strong statement in that regard. 6 consecutive telephone conversations. And the outcome, that was a readout of a telephone conversation between Secretary Kerry, then Secretary Kerry, and President Obama. The first use of the word condemnation came 4 days after the coup attempt in Turkey. And even more tragically, Secretary Kerry, the day after, he issued a statement and he called the parties to show restraint. Parties, meaning the Turkish people trying to defend the Turkish democracy and the terrorists that they are trying to disrupt the Turkish democracy and overthrow the Turkish government. That was the biggest disappointment of my life, of my total diplomatic career. A month later, Vice President Biden, he went to Turkey. I was there to greet him. And we had a number of contacts. He apologized, as have been mentioned before. And he said we should have come stronger, on stronger terms in defense of Turkish democracy, and so on and so forth. But the damage was done. The perception in Turkey increased as far as how United States reacted to the coup attempt in Turkey. And even more, we have submitted, we have delivered to US authorities 7 files, extradition and temporary arrest of Fethullah Gulen, concerning his activities prior to the 15th of July and his involvement. I mean, there were facts and figures and evidences in that regard presented to the US authorities as far as our requests for his extradition and temporary arrest. None of them were met. Let alone arresting Fethullah Gulen, he was not even questioned once. There is an ally of 70 years, suffered a terrorist coup attempt, lost 350 of his citizens, and more than 2,000, some of them are going to be permanently disabled, were injured. And they are accusing you. What do you say? A public prosecutor could have asked that question following the documents that we have delivered to the US authorities. None of them had happened. So, I mean, that raises questions and that raises hesitations as far as the strength of the Turkish-American alliance relationship and as far as the decisiveness of the US authorities in support of Turkish democracy. So that was a total, if you ask my opinion, failure and disappointment. As far as the future of the Turkish-American relations, well, I want to be optimistic, as Paolo has stated, because we are allies of 70 years. We have encountered several problems in the past, but we have managed to overcome those problems. At the end of the day, people in the United States say that Turkey needs US. Yes, of course, Turkey needs United States, but they lose sight of the fact that United States needs Turkey more than Turkey needs United States in order to promote or defend or advance its national strategic objectives in that region. You cannot find a better ally than Turkey in order to safeguard the long-term strategic objectives or interests of the United States in that region. You cannot do that with YPG, PYD. That's a terrorist organization. Today, they might align themselves with you, but in the future, you cannot predict what kind of a line of action they are going to adopt. So you have the second largest army of NATO over there. You have a credible, time-tested ally, Turkey, in that region. But unfortunately, we are encountered with a number of problems. If we can leave the Congress, which is acting under the influence of certain interest groups and lobby groups, if we can leave them out of the picture, and if the friends of Turkey, friends of Turkish-American relations could be more vocal and could emphasize the importance of Turkish-American relations, the relevance of Turkish-American relations, and the fact that Turkish-American relations are more than relevant more than ever before. I mean, taking into account the developments in Syria, Libya, the Mediterranean basin, in the Eastern Mediterranean for that matter. I didn't want to go into details of that issue because I was told that the gist of the discussion today will be the 15th of July. But we are encountered, North Atlantic Alliance is encountered with serious challenges in this part of the world. United States is challenged with serious developments in that region, and so Turkey. So, I mean, the keywords are consultation, cooperation, and coordination. We should increase cooperation, coordination, and consultation between Turkey and the United States. And at the end of the day, I hope that the people, the decision makers, decision shapers in the United States will not be blinded by the trees surrounding them to the forest. They will come to their senses and they will realize the importance of Turkey, not only for Turkey's own future, but also for the strategic objectives and interests of the United States. That will be the day that I will be looking for. And in that regard, I should say that I'm optimistic, because I have contacted several people that are sharing similar views with me and cognizant of the importance of Turkish-American relations. I hope at the end of the day we are going to prevail, because it's going to be to the benefit of Turkey, to the benefit of United States, and to the benefit of our both peoples. And as far as the Fethullah Gulen involvement, just a couple of words in that regard. It will be a miss if I didn't mention them. I emphasize that the 15th of July coup attempt was orchestrated by Fethullah Gulen, and he used his disciples, the so-called imams, to stage that coup attempt in Turkey. Just take a look at the 5 gentlemen, 5 persons that were captured, apprehended at the headquarters of the coup plotters in Ankara, Akıncı Air Base. Adil Öksüz, Kemal Batmaz, Hakan Çiçek, Harun Biriş, and Nurettin Oruç. All of them were imams responsible of different parts and parcels of the Turkish army, navy, gendarmerie, armed forces, air forces, all of them. And Adil Öksüz and Kemal Batmaz. They were in United States. They came here on the 11th of July. They returned back to Turkey on the 13th. Actually, that will be misleading. They did not spend 2 days over here. They boarded the plane on the 12th. Because of the time difference, they arrived in Ankara on the 13th. So they spent less than 24 hours in Washington, in Pennsylvania. They came here, they got their instructions, they returned back to Turkey, they organized the meetings with the other participants in that coup attempt, and they were apprehended at the headquarters of the coup plotters in Ankara. That should be an eye-opener for the US authorities. They told us, the Homeland Security officials told us that when they came to United States, they informed the customs authorities that they came here to visit their imam, Fethullah Gulen. What else do you ask for? What kind of a concrete evidence are you looking for? There is an ally of 70 years, deploying certain legal documents to the US relevant authorities in line with the agreement that has been signed between Turkey and the United States in 1979 for the extradition of those kind of criminals, and you are not taking any action. That's another disappointment. That's going to, I hope, Mr. Markov very elegantly mentioned what they are doing in terms of poisoning the education system in the United States. In addition to what he has mentioned, there has been some other decisions taken in Alabama, Oklahoma, and California as well, as far as the schools are concerned. Now the parents and certain teachers that were employed by the Fethullah Gulen movement in charter schools, they started to come out and they started to complain officially the way they treat the teachers and the pupils and the level of education in those schools. So I hope at the end of the day that will be realized, but I hope that it's going to be realized before a permanent damage is done to the US education system, to the US legal system, to the US financial system. Thank you very much, Kılıç.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And we were, of course, the Turkish people were following those statements. And I remember the second statement, the White House statement that came. And as a student of US politics and US foreign policy, that was one of the most unconventional statements. It was a readout, it was a statement. And for the Turkish people especially, most significant part of it is the absence of the use of the C word. There wasn't the mentioning of a coup attempt. So for Turkish public, of course, it reminded immediately when US didn't want to call what happened in Egypt as a coup. So it was at certain point considered at the public level almost an ambivalent attitude, still an ambivalent attitude to the coup attempt. And my second question is for Mr. Duran. Professor Duran, Usame Jamal mentioned multiple times that if the coup was successful, he started a couple sentences by stating that if the coup was successful. So I want to ask you a counterfactual question. What would happen if the coup was successful, both in Turkish domestic policy and foreign policy?
Thank you, Kılıç. Well, actually, this is an option that I don't want to reimagine. But in order to answer your question, I have to say something about that. Well, it could be a nightmare for the Turkish people and the region. First, for the domestic politics, I should say that this organization, FETÖ, Gulen terrorist organization, is an opaque organization, and this was organized around a messianic cult leader, and the disciples are very tied to their orders, and they would conduct this, they would stage this coup attempt in the name of Kemalism. And this is a sign of their taqiyya, because although they are in a way of a kind of Islamic, but a heretic understanding of religion, but they represent themselves as if they are democratic, tolerant, humanitarian, and at the same time Kemalist. So this coup attempt, this possible coup attempt, would create a severe problem for Turkish democracy. What kind of problems do I expect? First, they would regard taking a revenge of President Erdogan and followers of AK Party in the name of Kemalism. And this would create a kind of problem of secularism and religiosity division. Although they are in the different page of their belief, they would create this division purposefully. But at the same time, they will seize the critical institutions of the state to conduct a further new coup d'etat, for their political purposes. This would follow maybe 1, 2, 3 years later. But during that time, they would arrest hundreds of thousands of AK Party followers, as if they are conducting them as their crimes or their problems during the government. And this would create such a division domestically that was not even apparent seen during the 28th February process in Turkey. And again, this would actually encourage PKK terrorists to divide Turkey in the southern cities, because we know that there were some PKK groups approaching to Turkey-Syrian border in order to make some terrorist activities in the southern cities of Turkey. So this internal division, chaos, and further some terrorist attacks on the southern part of Turkey would create such a instability in Turkey that would actually affect the surrounding region. First, Syria and Iraq, and at the same time, all the entire region. Yes, we know that Turkey is sometimes criticized by being not consolidated its democracy, but still Turkey is a point of stability, is a country of stability for the region. And as NATO ally, Turkey is trying to, at the same time, consolidate its role in keeping peace and stability in that region. So regionally, it would be, and again, quagmire for all the parties in the region. And again, this instability in Turkey would create many issues of terrorism, refugee problem to Europe, and this would create a stability problem, security problem for Europe. So in that case, as I said, that is a nightmare that none of the parties could imagine or could expect such a thing. And one point further, I'm very glad to see that Mr. von Schirach stated that Turkey and the US are natural allies. And at the same time, Mr. Hall underlined the fact that there is a progress in terms of realizing the destructive activities of FETÖ, Gulen terrorist organization in the US. Yes, these are hopeful signs, but as Ambassador Mr. Kılıç stated properly and in a comprehensive way, Turkish public opinion was very disappointed by the early reactions coming from Washington and other European capitals, Western capitals. This created a crisis of trust. And this has been strengthened by the Washington's problematic policy towards Syria. I mean, supporting YPG, arming YPG. If you combine these two, FETÖ, now Gulen is not even interrogated by the FBI, is not questioned even by the FBI, and there is no progress in that respect. Two terrorist organizations, one is accepted by the US, and another one is, let's say, is not accepted yet. That these terrorist organizations are supported by our natural ally, the US. This creates a feeling, a very traumatic feeling on the part of the Turkish public opinion. And unfortunately, the people of the Washington, the elite of the Washington, do not pay enough attention to how problematic, how traumatic is this. And yes, I personally keep the feeling that expectations that the U.S. and Turkey relations will be in a new page. And I know the leaders, our leaders, President Trump and Erdogan, are in a good mood to cooperate with each other. But still, we have to rethink our Turkey-U.S. relations in a way that to see that we are natural allies in the region, and without stability in the bilateral relations, neither Turkey nor U.S. can keep their national interests any longer. Let's hope that our event will contribute to this feeling. Thank you, Kılıç.
Thank you very much, Professor Duran. And Professor Duran was on the night of the July 15, actually, I was calling him from US, and we were in touch, and he was on the bridge, actually, among the people that tried to resist the coup. And it was a very fateful night. Everybody was worried. Everybody was worried for those who are in Turkey, those who are resisting for the coup, especially after the distribution of those violent attacks to the civilians on the bridge. And Mr. Usama Jamal, I have a question just following up that. Two questions, actually, very much related to that. One was about the resistance of the Turkish people to the coup attempt. And the resistance during the coup attempt was a unique form of resistance. There has been coups before, and most Turkish people never accepted the coup and usually followed a different way of resisting the coup. So when you look at the coups in Turkey, in the first election after the coup, Turkish people basically respond to the military coup by bringing those who were overthrown by the government, by the military at that time. So this was something unique, that it was a civilian resistance, it was an immediate resistance, and it was non-violent, and there was very innovative and creative methods, actually, that was invented that night, actually, by the people. It was very courageous. And what should this resistance, civilian resistance to a military attempt, an attempt to military takeover, would represent in the Middle East and in the Islamic world for the future? And the second question is, Mr. Duran just finished his remarks by mentioning lack of appreciation of trauma in the United States. And why do you think there was that lack of appreciation of that trauma, actually? Why especially the people in the United States maybe, and in the larger Western world, didn't understand the trauma that Turkish people went through that night? Is it because of the lack of military coups in those countries? Or is there something else that needs to be addressed?
Thank you for the question. So 2 questions you have raised here. Just as I said before, I do salute the Turkish people for the remarkable way they resisted the coup, and emphasizing the peaceful way that they have rejected the coup. And you are right, there were innovative ways that they have used to reject the coup. And I think this is what is so important about this whole thing here. So I think what we have here is a situation where people been attacked, their will, their vote, their future, their system that they have been yearning for long to have a democratic representative system that can convey their views. And so the way that they have they reacted to it, I think it was an example for the entire, not just the entire region there, which is the Middle East and others, but the entire world, that the will of the people can make a difference when they really adhere and hold on to what they believe is their right to protect their voices at the ballot boxes. But I also mentioned that my regard to the military who did not side with the coup, who showed constraint and did not get themselves involved in any way, understanding the history of military intervention in the political life, versus the difference, let's say, in Egypt. The people also had their peaceful rejection of the coup. But we have a vicious, violent, bloody quill of the will of the people. And they went on and committed one of the worst massacre against peaceful people demonstrating against a coup attempt. And that's why I think the Egyptian military has degraded themselves to something that the Arab people always held the Egyptian army as a source of pride and a good military that protects the people of the people hopes and aspiration. I think they have degraded themselves to the lowest point ever in my lifetime that I have ever viewed the Egyptian people. And that's why I continue to say to the Turkish military, stay the course. Your job is to protect the people, to protect the country, and not to get involved in the politics. You need to improve your skills, your ability to defend the country and keep it independent of any need from outside, and have the people live in peace, and let them decide their political issues and their representation. So for the rest of the world, and especially the Middle East, the way that people in Turkey reacted to the coup should be an aspiration, should be a model, should always be followed. There is no gain to have a violent reaction and to indulge the country into chaos, violence, destruction. Unfortunately, we have seen glimpses of that in Algeria back in the 80s, when there was in the early 90s, when there was some hope for the Algerian people to have some democratic change, and their democracy was rejected or been stopped, and then the country indulged in violence. I think that should be rejected. A peaceful demonstration, a peaceful attempt to sustain the right of people for democratic change and reform is the way and the course that should always follow. And therefore, what the Turkish people did is beyond the borders of Turkey, beyond the borders of Ankara and Istanbul. They were truly symbols. The world will never forget those brave pictures of people opening their chest, standing on the tanks and talking out the military and the soldiers that we are your brothers and we are your fathers and we are your sons and you should not do this to us, was bravery at its highest level that history should ever record. To be able to stand before the tanks and not to shoot one bullet against your own fellow who have been misguided to harm your country. So I think that was remarkable, and it should be always the tale that we should narrate it to generations and generations of our children and future generations, that this is how we stood for dictatorship, for people who wants to take our will out of our own voices. The second questions, if you don't mind, remind me of your second question.
Why do you think there is this lack of empathy actually in the Western world? Is it because of the lack of any coup attempts or coups in these countries, or is there any underlying something structural, something much more significant that allows these countries to be more or less inconsistent when it becomes their attitude towards the coup?
Okay. Unfortunately, if I want to be polite and use scholarly terms, I would say the media has been inconsistent. Mm-hmm. But if I want to borrow President Trump terms, I would say it's a fake news. Mm-hmm. The reason I say that, because it is unfortunately that to oppose military coup should be irrespective of the government that have been attacked by this coup, whether you agree with its policies or not. It's a matter of principles. It is a matter of where we stand, what our values are. And then you go from there and you judge. And sometimes you agree with certain people, but you don't agree with on other points. But if democracy is really what we're trying to preach, is democracy what we're trying to emphasize, then you should never, ever, at any time, be hesitant, not for a second, to say military coup are rejected and unacceptable. And as everybody's kind of, noticed that the feeling was at the time when the news reported it, this coup missed an opportunity to succeed, basically. And instead of saying, luckily the coup has been averted and the people of Turkey maintain their democracy. Yes, we do disagree with some of the policies of that government, but we are looking for the long term of our relationship with the people of Turkey, with a country that has been for decades our ally and our biggest hope in that region, because we cannot send always our troops over there, but we have allies and friends who can protect our mutual interest in the region. So that was missing, which shows probably you're right in some of the assessment there. Maybe they have never witnessed a military coup to feel the bite of military control. Yet the Black Lives Matters that recently have showed us a taste of National Guard's control, police brutality, when you give it beyond its mandate, the use of force, maybe, and then they can start understand what military coup can mean to people. We certainly wish never be a military coup anywhere, and let the people decide in a peaceful way and an acceptable way how they want to choose their representative, how they want to introduce legislations, how they want to change their system. That's the way, that's truly the civilized way. But we have to be consistent in order to be believed, in order to be respected, in order to be to accept the other views. But when you have a double standard, then obviously you are not there for the true principle that you have always been preaching about, but you are about a biased. So why is it not okay for the people of Turkey to have their democracy? Why it's not okay for the Egyptian people? Why it's not okay for the Syrian? Why it's not even for the Tunisian, who are, until today, there has been multiple attempts to undermine the Tunisian experience, which is a unique for the Middle East, especially in North Africa. So I think we still question the sincerity of democracy when it comes to the Middle East. Unfortunately, the so-called our allies are the dictators, the monarchies, who have been creating instability in the region and beyond their region. They are creating the instability in Libya. They have already put Egypt on the verge of explosion. It is just a matter of time to see Egypt really decline to the worst civilian unrest, I would say, because economy is terrible. The way the country was managed and still is managed is in a horrible way. We believe it's just a matter of time. So those regimes who got the petrodollars trying to create instability in the region is going to backfire sooner or later. And we see it sooner than really later. The two richest countries in the Arab war waging a war against the poorest country in the Arab world, which is Yemen. They could not make an inch progress in that region after 5-6 years, and inflicting the worst humanitarian crisis in our modern time against the Yemeni people. It just shows the lack of not just experience, but the lack of humanity, the lack of decency in even trying to arrange your political alliances. And you can have interest, no problem with that, but the way you conduct it is really becomes the questions about how good you are. And unfortunately, we don't have any example to show at this time in the Middle East that we can feel proud about it, other than the great model that we have seen in Turkey. And that's why we pray that this system in Turkey, this spirit in the Turkish people remain. And this is the kind of virus that we welcome to be inflicted with, and to have that love for democracy and willing to defend it in all peaceful and possible ways.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jamal. Mr. von Schirach, I will just follow up with Usama Jamal's comments. And he mentioned this inconsistency in the attitude. And you mentioned the Turkey-NATO relation and significance of the NATO framework and as an organization, as a collective security organization, the significance of NATO for international security. Do you see a more or less problematic attitude by the NATO countries to the coup attempts around the world? And do you think there should be a reform or a change in the attitude of the NATO countries that would provide a consistency of NATO to resist to the coup attempts? Because we know that nobody likes the coups, nobody likes the coup attempts, but the attitude is that we don't like the coup attempts, but once it is successful, well, we have to continue to work with that.
Well, look, thank you for the question. I'm not sure that I have a good answer for this. And getting NATO countries agree on something complicated and as nuanced as this, I think it's a really a very tough endeavor. If anybody wants to take the lead on this, and I'm not sure who will. I doubt that Washington is in a position to do this right now, especially as we are in the middle of an election campaign. So we would have really to wait until next January in terms of timeline if we want America to lead on this, but I wouldn't count on it. I don't know. I mean, of course, it would be nice if there were consistency and if NATO would have a policy, a binding policy, where all countries would say, you know, in order to be members of NATO, you have to uphold to certain basic principles of civilian government and respect for constitutions, et cetera, and countries that move away from these standards are no longer welcome, or something to that effect. I mean, I think it would be appropriate. I'm not sure how successful launching such an effort right now it would be. But let me just say, you know, regarding the possibility, which I really hope, you know, will come to pass, about my optimism regarding the bilateral relationship between the United States and Turkey. As the ambassador mentioned, and I'm in full agreement, you look at the map of the Middle East, you look at the region, there is no other country that has, you know, democratic principles, a fairly advanced, sophisticated, diverse economy, a young workforce, fairly well educated, that, you know, that can partner, not just with the US, I mean, with other countries as well, but for us, as we are looking for friends in the region. Certainly we don't have them in Iran, you know, we know that. So where do we go? Syria? I don't think so. Iraq is a mess, which unfortunately we sadly contributed in a major way to create. And that's about it, you know, if we talk about, you know, Turkey's neighbors. So Turkey remains, you know, with all these problems and with all these issues and with all the concerns expressed by everybody here today, and I really share the concerns of the ambassadors and his dismay. I'm sure that night when he was trying to alert, you know, and have some reactions from the White House, and then nothing came, and then Secretary Kerry said, well, all parties should restrain, you know, all that. What is that? Is that a support for an elected government? Certainly not. So, I mean, I understand all that, and I have full sympathy, having, you know, had the opportunity to be educated on many of these issues. But I would say this, in a practical way. I work in an academic institution here in Washington that has strong connections with Turkey. BAU Global is a network that originates in Istanbul, actually, and it has, you know, affiliates in Germany, in the UK, here in the United States, and in Canada. What I would like to see is a concerted effort, and that's soft, you know, soft power, if you wish, increase academic ties with Turkey. Of course, there are many Turkish students here in the United States, but by far the largest, you know, country that sends China. China is not exactly a democracy, right? In our own understanding. Who's next in line? Saudi Arabia, right? Another glaring example of constitutional democracy and freedom of expression and speech. So, I mean, can we do better with Turkey? I mean, there are many, and the ambassador, I'm sure, knows this very well. There are many Turkish students in the United States. Can we do better? Can Americans create, you know, open up channels of communication, get more Turkish students, advanced, you know, graduate students, what have you? I mean, there, as I said, there are several. It's not that there aren't any, but these things can be improved. Let's look at opportunities for foreign direct investment. We know that Turkey, you know, is in a situation right now where it would really welcome and has changed laws and provisions to make it easier for foreign investors to come into the country. I mean, what are we doing from our end in the United States to promote all this in various sectors, be it renewable energy or agriculture or agribusiness or mechanical industries and what have you? I'm trying to say there are many untapped opportunities. We know that the two presidents, Erdogan and Trump, made a sort of a broad commitment, you know, a while back to increase very, very substantially the bilateral, you know, trade exchanges and whatnot. Of course, now with COVID, you know, everything is at a standstill, understandably. But hopefully this pandemic will be gone, God willing, and we will resume business as usual. So I see these two areas, you know, education, academic cooperation, scientific cooperation, and a much more vibrant investment environment as ways to bridge some of the differences. I'm not saying this is a wonderful solution and it will be done in a day or two. Obviously, these are long-term commitments and investments, notwithstanding all the other problematic issues that have been aired during this panel. And they're all there. But, you know, things are rarely black and white. It's shades of gray. I am, again, I repeat, confident and optimistic that the two societies, the American society and the Turkish societies, have much to contribute to each other. I've seen so many Turkish students here in Washington, both undergraduate and graduate. I've been to Bahçeşehir University in Istanbul, and I have seen, you know, the very effervescent climate and interest and enthusiasm of those students about world affairs, about bilateral relations. So I think there is a ground there that can be, you know, further cultivated. And I understand that these are long-term propositions. So on that note, I hope that, you know, we try to do something in this regard in our university. But you know, I hope that this understanding and this sense that there is an opportunity there can be grasped by other relevant counterparts here in the US and contribute to further the dialogue between the two countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, Mr. Hall, do you share the optimism of Mr. von Schirach and your final thoughts about July 15 coup attempt and the Turkish-American relations in the aftermath?
Well, thank you. You know, Professor von Schirach is somebody I hold in high esteem, and I'm glad he's very optimistic. I don't know if I share his optimism, at least with the way the Gulen movement is achieving its power here in the United States. And so I would say that hopefully on the issues that Professor von Schirach has raised, foreign direct investment, bilateral initiatives in education, trying to understand our countries better, because I do think there are things that we have that make us very close in many ways. And those things we should try to expound on and grow. And but I am a little bit pessimistic by what I see from our government in terms of dealing with Fethullah Gulen and the Gulen movement. And as it's been mentioned, the FBI has never really done a thorough investigation of this violent group, a political group that resides within our borders and continues to make, I think, it continues to be a threat, not only to Turkey, but to the United States, perhaps in different ways. I'll always remember what I saw that night of July 15th, 2016. It was some 3 months after we had released Killing Ed, my film about the Gulen movement in the United States. We released it in Manhattan in March of 2016. And it was shocking to see how far I think the Gulen movement had progressed on its journey through trying to silently, let's say, infiltrate Turkish society and government and other institutions. And I think that's something, as I've said before, that Americans and people in other nations that have the Gulen movement operating within its borders need to be very wary of. They need to be very cautious of. And I'm glad that there's optimism for the relations between Turkey, and I hope that is true, and I hope our friendship will grow in coming years. But I'm also concerned about what I see on, you know, weekly and sometimes daily basis about the Gulen movement and its operations here and the threats it poses to both of our nations. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all of our panelists, Mr. Ambassador, Professor Duran, Mr. Jamal, Mr. von Schirach, and Mr. Hall. And thank for the, I want to thank for the Communication Directorate of the Presidency for organizing this panel. I want to thank for the audience for listening. for our panelists, and we one more time remember the victims, those who lost their lives, and our thoughts and prayers are their families and those who are still having the significant health problems and disabilities as a result of the attacks that took place that night. And I want to thank you all one more time and hope to see you in our next webinar. Thank you.